Good to see you all. How you doing?
Good.
I'm
Yeah.
glad we're
Good,
able
Jeff.
to actually talk about Luca, but before we do, I really just want to give everybody a baseline for you and let them know your breaking in story. Jesse, you started as a novelist, and that's kind of what led you down this path. You know, Me and Earl and the Dying Girl was what really put you on map for everyone, and it won the Sundance Film Festival as well.
Yeah, it did. I started out with no ambition at all to be a screenwriter. I didn't even think I was going to make it as a novelist. I thought I was going to maybe top out at like freelance textbook editor, which is what I was for a while. But I got my first book published, and the main character is a kid who wants to write movies. The book is Me and Earl and the Dying Girl. And because he's narrating the book, he writes some of the book in screenplay format. Now, I just did that because I think screenplay format looks really funny on the page. Sometimes letters are in all caps, and it's like, that's a funny choice. Why would you do that? That's emphasis seems inappropriate. So I just got a kick out of it. But then the book landed on the desk of a producer who was like, hey, this could be interesting. And it seems like this writer is already familiar with writing screenplays. Maybe we can see if he wants to adapt it. So they came to me and I was like, this is a paying job. They're like, yeah. I was like, yeah, of course. I know how to do that. That's, yeah. How, just if you have some refreshers though, that would be great. And basically conned my way into learning how to become a screenwriter. And the producer was himself a really accomplished writer named Dan Fogelman, who taught me 98% of everything I know. And the other 2% was Mike Jones right here. So
it was Mike.
yeah.
That's good. I mean,
2%.
I guess
2%.
one question, I actually have interviewed you before about Earl. What was kind of something eye-opening for you as a screenwriter? Obviously, you were adapting your own work, so you knew the story well. But turning it into cinema is a different, there's a different relationship to how the narrative is projected, for lack of a better word. What was something that was really eye-opening in that experience of adaptation that you remember?
Oh my gosh, there was a lot of things. I mean, I think conceptually, the book is written in the first person, and I found that a film kind of can't be in the first person. You just are outside of the head. You don't have that access to stream of consciousness, even if you are using things like voiceover and, really subjective kind of camera work. And so things that were working in the book didn't really work in the movie because we're just not in this kid's head. We're observing him, we're observing everyone in the world. But one wonderful thing that did was it made the characters outside of this kid much richer. This was a story about a teenage boy who was really like, not great at observing other people. And he kind of gets there by the end, but he's not seeing them very fully. So in the book, we don't have as much a sense of them as we have to in the movie. And I also realized, if I'm writing a part for someone like Olivia Cooke, that role has to have a lot for her to do. There has to be a lot of character there. And so I think it made me discover these other characters more deeply because, filmmaking requires you to do that. It's so collaborative. And that's what I love about it.
Mike, you're kind of coming from the other side of Pixar, the side that I've always been intrigued by, because it's the creative side, the executive side, and you served on both Incredibles 2, Coco, Toy Story 4. What were kind of some of your experiences behind there, working with the storytellers
Hmm.
to keep things moving, and then this accredited screenwriter?
Well, on those particular movies, I was mostly serving on the brain trust. So we would, of course, see the reels of all the different versions of these movies, and I would go in and kind of give my notes. And some I was more involved with than others. But it was really Soul was my first screenplay credit here, and Soul and Luca were kind of sister projects for a while because we were kind of on a very similar track. So we would often share scripts and stuff like that. But before I came to Pixar, I was a screenwriter for a good 20 years, and I found my way into Pixar with just a really odd script, and I loved it when I first visited here because I love collaboration. I love working with other writers and other story artists and other directors. And I don't really like to spend too much time with myself because I'm not that interesting. So I can confirm this. Jesse can attest to that.
Well, actually, it's interesting that you talk about the brain trust, because I was going to bring that up a little later. What could you tell people about how it works? Because it's something that harkens back to the classic studio system of having an official story department and other storytellers collaborating with the writers. And it's usually about a matter of best idea wins. But what could you tell us about the inner workings of the brain trust at Pixar?
Well, I mean, there's two secrets of the brain trust for me, and that is the brain trust is a way of getting a bunch of people together in the same room that want to see that director's movie. Because what happens when you get notes from anybody is or some people is usually they're giving you what they want to see in the movie or what their movie version would be. But the brain trust is the best brain trusts, and we don't get it right every time. But the best brain trusts are a group of directors that understand the talent of that singular director and want that director to bring themselves into the movie rather than make the movie that Andrew Stanton would make, or Brad Bird, or Pete Docter. Like, these are all very, very smart story people. And that's what happened with Enrico and Luca. I think it was always a constant, like, where is Enrico in this movie? Like, where is Enrico's artistry? Like, where is Enrico's mind and heart? It's not about like us. It's really about the filmmaker. So that's the first thing that I think makes Pixar films so successful, is that lean into the director. But the second is we just have time, right? So we spend years on these movies. How many brain trusts did we have on this? I mean, it was
more
6,
than
7.
a handful. Yeah,
it was a lot, right?
We take a lot of bites of the apple with the story reels, right? And that's also something specific of animation, as opposed to we have a script and we shoot it and then maybe we do some reshoots. That's a very different thing here. We really don't want to produce anything until we know we have it.
I mean, it would be akin to if you were able to make a live action movie for 4 years and reshoot it again and again and again and again, and then tear it all down and make it, like, you would eventually probably make a pretty good movie.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about that in the spoiler section to kind of get into the process, because obviously for our viewers that don't know, they're talking about having animatics, which are rough scratches of the movie that they screen from beginning to end, which are tracked by voice actors to kind of give them a sense of how their script is going, how the pacing feels, and stuff like that. And we're going to definitely talk about in the spoilers section. Before we move to Enrico's breaking in story, I've got to ask them, Mike, what do you remember as this sounds like a comic book, the crisis of the brain trust, a moment where on one of the films you were on, there was a problem that it really took a while to crack. And how did you crack it?
I would say it was on Toy Story 4. Toy Story 4 was a movie that we wanted to make, that we were really having trouble finding that point where Forky kind of turns, where Woody and Forky are kind of linked and partnered, right? Forky was always this crazy little figure that didn't really understand what being a toy was. And so that was a crisis for us, because it was very divergent from what what Woody needs, right? So what we needed to link them at some point. And so in the brain trust, we just started to think about how can we link them? And we kind of came up with the very seeds of the idea when Forky and Woody are thrown out of the RV. They're walking to the carnival, and Woody tells Forky what it means to be a toy, like what it emotionally means to be a toy. And Forky listens to this and he takes that in and he changes. He goes like, you know what? You're exactly right. I want to be a toy. And that moment changed the movie for so much of the better, because it kind of broke a log jam. And suddenly these two characters are combined, and then they can go kind of meet eventually the antagonist at the end, and their wants are then combined too. So that was one of the most fun brain trusts, because that was where we have a problem we need to fix. How do we do it? And the great minds came together and figured it out,
Enrico, your breaking in story, I would think, would kind of start with La Luna. You had worked in animation departments on many other films, but for your Pixar experience, you also ended up storyboarding and being in the story department for Ratatouille, Up, and Coco, and this is your directorial feature debut. What were some of the things that you thought were important about the creative process that you gleaned over the years on those classic Pixar movies, which I know would be its own podcast in itself, but if
Yeah.
there's just anything that comes to mind for you?
Well, there's so much learning, and you're absolutely right. There when I think of Ratatouille, which is the job I came here for, there was like I was the first story artist they hired. I remember it was me and the head of story, and interestingly, probably like, oh, here's a European movie. Hey, maybe a European story artist will it's a plus. And that was one thing I learned on that movie for sure is the stamina needed. You're going through, it was the first time that I experienced that long. It's a marathon, and there's seasons, and then you crack the story in a way, but then something doesn't work. There was definitely a difficult production. And so there's a lot of learning in just needing that stamina and staying with it, and finishing something. And then, the other things that comes to mind, and of course, this is something that Pixar, we believe so deeply at Pixar, and that I leaned in as I pitched The Shore, the first time I was able to direct something. It's just making sure that you're saying, that you're telling something from the heart, some true connection to the story. And we usually really go and look for that personal story to tell. And having had success with La Luna, which is very much the story about me really struggling with the conflict that my dad and my grandfather had. They never got along, and I always felt very stuck in the middle. So that whole short is really very much about that, like a kid who's got to figure out, the dad wants it one way, the grandpa wants it another way. The heart of that becomes, married with the fantastical conceptual ideas that we need at Pixar. So that is a concoction that I started getting comfortable with. And then, you start pitching ideas that have that, like, okay, what is another really hard, things that I went through my life that I felt strongly about. And that is how I got to the heart of Luca, which of course was a different story in my youth of my, best friend and I. But I think those are the couple of the big things that are lessons. They're also things that we leverage and we feel are important to storytelling, to find the emotion with this, of course, very visual, fantastical side that animation wants and needs. So that has been a wonderful journey here, because that's something that we, Pixar, it's so in the DNA of what Pixar does.
It's a good place to start, though, with the seed of the idea. I know that a lot of times when directors, especially, are brought in on projects at Pixar, they're supposed to pitch a few ideas, not just one, right? Yeah. And I'm just curious about what your pitching process was like and how this triumvirate of screenwriters was formed.
Well, what happens is that actually I went to, you're a little bit in the classroom. I was a bit in the back and going like, could I pitch something? Even after a short, it's not like you're in the front of the class, to be honest. So I was like, can I pitch something? Can I pitch something? Finally, they say, okay, pitch something. And I remember pitching 3 ideas. None of them went forward. They're like, but you're something, keep going, pitch us again. So even the process is very much a process of like, don't give up, keep going, which is so much about even making the movie. And I think the idea of 3 is a bit of a question of showing the kind of storytelling that you're interested in, showing the kind of stories you like. And usually you get traction. And I remember the time then on second pitch, I got traction on 2 of them. And I started developing it a little bit. And that's usually, you do development kind of by yourself and with help from story artists, from the development team. So you don't have a writer to work with yet. And once you choose the idea here, and I remember for me, strangely, we couldn't make up our mind between 2. One was Luca and one was another. For a couple of months, we started working with some writers, and that was just some freelancers we worked for a couple of a month. And really, when I connected to Jesse, was already after we had done a draft with another writer, and we were kind of struggling. So we didn't, there was a failed collaboration that got us to a good point, but not far enough. And so I read Me and Roland and the Dying Girl, and I remember really like wanting to meet Jesse. And when we pitched him the basic idea, so the idea was there was too much in it. There was a lot that needed to be, taken away. It was very adventurous.
Just for fun to hear it, because the movie's beauty, part of it is the simplicity of this great friendship.
That's right. Yeah, we had a whole quest.
What was the complication? But wait,
there was a lot that needed to be stripped. Yeah, there was a sense
what were some of the weeds that you had to take away that weren't working in the original iteration? Because
there was a third kid. There was a third kid, so it was almost like a Stand By Me journey. Of course, we knew the Stand By Me was a key kind of inspiration for this kind of summer of our youth. But we realized the third, actually his name was Chicho, and it turned into one, we reused him as one of the goons of our villain. But he used to be a blowfish-like sea monster. He was a third guy. And in the way, there was a whole quest of them really finding some magical objects to become human completely. And there was a whole other, there was even on the island, there was even a town that looked like humans. So they were kind of hiding in plain sight and saying hello to passing humans.
Oh, that's interesting.
And that was a case more of like, well, put your protagonist as far away as from what he wants as possible, because this idea that they were already hanging out a little bit up above the water really screwed us up. So yeah, a lot to simplify. A big finale with Alberto turned into a huge crack. So we realized pretty quickly that the core wanted to be small, wanted to talk about the relationship. And I remember meeting with you, Jesse, and really connecting immediately with this idea of strong friendships with people who are very different from each other, right? From that, we both had some interesting friendships that were so unlike who we were. That helped us in some way.
Give us what you were hearing at the beginning, and then we want to hear about how Mike came on coming off of Soul.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a lot that was so wonderful about this movie when I came on. Of course, like this setting and, having seen La Luna, I knew what Enrico was capable of, which is just this fantastic atmosphere and kind of marriage of image and music and evocation of family and character without having to say very much, which is to say without saying anything at all, because there's no dialogue there. And so as a writer, that's really exciting, because there's this tremendous power in simplicity that's possible with a director like that. And so yeah, I came on, and there was this really interesting friendship at the heart of the story, but there was so much stuff going on that you kind of lost track of it. You lost sight of it a little bit. And, even this third character, whenever he's on the screen, he was kind of the funniest one. He was the one you wanted to pay attention to. And I'm like, that's a problem, because he's not either side of this central relationship. So we spent a lot of time at the beginning just talking about this sort of transformative friendship. And Enrico and I were similar as kids, I think, where we tended to be the shy one, the introverted one, kind of cerebral, very in our own heads, and timid, unsure about asserting ourselves. And then each of us made friends with someone who was really not that, who was kind of like brash and sort of a risk taker. My friend was really into like heavy metal, which was the music that I was completely uninterested in. And so he taught me to headbang, and it was and I was actually really afraid of him before we became friends. He was just a kid in my school where I was like, I might flee the room if he when he comes in. So yeah, and then we became friends actually because there was a pickup soccer game we were both playing. He was on the other team, and he knocked me down, and I just immediately started crying because I was made out of toothpicks essentially, and he sort of loomed over me, and it was clearly something complicated going on emotionally in his face, and I was like, it's okay, I always do this. And then he was like, no, it's not okay, I always do this. And there was something, I don't know, we just bonded in that moment. By the end of the day, we were sort of best friends already. And it was one of these friendships that just changed my life. And Enrico had something similar, and we realized that's the story we want to tell. And it can be quite simple, and it wants to be really simple. And a lot of the discipline of the storytelling is going to require us to like cast off things that like would be really wonderful in another movie, but don't belong in this one.
That makes sense. And then Mike, at what point did you come on officially as writer? Obviously, having finished up on Soul.
So I was 4 years on Soul, and when I wrapped off that, I went right into Luca, and I was on Luca for a bit over a year, and I felt like my job at that point was they had churned through a lot of story. And after churning through that much story, we should know where the movie is and where we're leaning in. And sometimes, like, and it happened on Soul, it happened on so many projects that I've been in, you kind of you get a little stuck, you get a little bleary-eyed because you've just been working on the story for so long. I feel like the best thing I did early on was just be a new set of eyes and really just train everybody's attention on where the film is really working. And as Jesse said, it's the friendship, right? It's just that when those two boys meet, it was magic immediately, and you don't want to see them split, And I think so I brought a sense of structure. I think a little bit. I helped in kind of taking out some of the fat that needed to be trimmed, but mostly it was, now that we have this friendship, what's going to threaten that friendship? And the first thing is going to be the town. So I was really all about the moment that they get there, like after the euphoria of seeing like how great this town is, we need to see the danger right away. We need to see like how bad this could get for them. Like they're not only going to be rejected, they might even be like speared and like, they're going to be killed. Right. And so it was about crafting that, like hiding that from this new friend that they make. And then, I'm always really big into, if you have two characters that are so close together, like what's the moment where they split? What's the moment where one betrays the other? What's the moment where suddenly it's almost like the friendship is dissolved and gone away because something has entered the frame here. And I feel like one of our best collaborative moments among all three of us was that, I put forward that they that Alberto like throws Luca in front of Julia to reveal. Are we going to give spoilers yet?
I was just going to stop you. I'm going to actually use this moment to go straight into our spoilers section. So if for any reason you have not seen the movie, or you're listening to this on iTunes or Spotify, or watching the Backstory Magazine YouTube page, this stemmed from a virtual screening that we did, and you all at the virtual screening have seen the movie. But otherwise, if you have not, and you don't want spoilers, press pause. Go watch Luca. It's sitting right there in Disney Plus for you. Come back and then finish the rest of the podcast, because we're getting into spoilers now. And Mike, what you were getting at though was threat, and you were getting at the concept of antagonism. And what I love about this movie is that this isn't a save the world movie. The world is an intimate, small world of friendship, and it starts off as two friends, and then Julia is led into their world. And really, the only risks in the movie is the destruction of that friendship by any means. And I think one of the things to talk about right in the beginning, beyond the physical threats of the town, of course, you're absolutely right. It's the secret of the movie, which is that Luca and Alberto have a secret, and they have to protect it, not only for their own life, but kind of for their friendship with Julia as well, and to try and assimilate. At what point did the concept of secret become such a big deal for this movie? Because it really is the one thing that they're protecting aside from their friendship.
It was really early on. One thing that comes to mind, sorry, Mike, but I think it's really intrinsic in the fact of this weird power of being able to hide in plain sight, which was like this idea of like the sea monsters but can look human, so a changeling. And I remember in one of the first pitches, Pete Docter kind of saying like, oh, that's interesting. It does make me think about my own puberty. I felt like every day I was changing, something was going on with my body. I was ashamed, so there was just something about a kid that age, the difficulty of growing up, the difficulties of puberty, connecting to this idea of having something to hide as a whole other, your true self being a sea monster. So I just wanted to to say like that, interestingly, that is kind of part of what makes the concept interesting in that age, especially, right? That the fact that they have the secret, because especially as little kids, you can be ashamed of so many things, and especially if you're timid and shy. So there was something that felt right about a weird changeling story at that age.
So what else was important for you with crafting an antagonist? And of course, I'm all ears if there was a different antagonist that was changed up later, because I know from all the other Pixar interviews I've done, sometimes when you get through enough drafts, sometimes there are global changes like that. So I'm curious if there was one like this, or if it's pretty much the way that we know it is in the movie.
Hercule was there from the beginning. I think though I think you could argue that the balance of these two stories, the story about a friendship and the stories about two worlds coming together, needed to be found. So even the version of the script that ended with the Kraken, that of course,
And Enrico, if you could tell us about that now that we're in the spoiler section.
Yes. So
I love the idea of
Alberto
the Kraken.
was magically, he was trying to turn into a human. The magic went all wrong. He turned into this huge Kraken. And then Luca, similarly to our movie, needed to ultimately sacrifice everything to try and save him. But he was trying to save him in front of, humans with spear guns. And so this was the big, the two worlds come to
And it's Alberto
meet.
that turns into the Kraken, right?
Alberto was turning into the Kraken, yeah. But I feel like that was speaking to finding the balance between two parts of that movie, and we needed to make sure that we realized, and when we did that, well, actually, it's not like that the two worlds aren't part of the story, right? But the more important thing is the relationship. So yes, and so that meeting of the two worlds happens in our like post-race moment, right? But it's subservient to the kids and their relationships. And so that was a big part that we realized, of course, this is dangerous. These kids could die. These fishermen need to be there with their spears ready. But it wasn't as important as what happens between Alberto and Luca. Are they going to betray themselves? Are they going to come back together? Is Luca going to be able to convince Alberto that their friendship is worth it after he betrayed it? That those are the things that come to mind as the important things. But Hercule could be a great question in itself, because he's a strange antagonist, because we argued back and forth. Like, I thought it was a bit of a chance we were taking, but it was a willful chance to not give him a third dimension, right? Like, very often we talk about characters, villains, and like, well, tell me why, but give me some depth. And we're like, can he just be funny and a real douchebag?
To build on that too, he's based on Mike. That was another thing that Mike really brought to the movie, because you don't see this now, but he shows up every day on his beautiful Vespa and he's revving it and mocking everyone.
When I first shoved Jesse down on the soccer field and lifted him back up, we became friends then, but we split. We came back together. I think.
Going back for a second, you guys, and I don't want to relive the soccer trauma, but characters need goals. And again, the beauty of simplicity, it was not just the friendship. They were taking that first step to get out of their home world, right, in the ocean, and to go live amongst humans. And they had the goal of being able to go and explore the world on a Vespa together, which I thought was just another beautiful idea, and something that everybody could easily grasp onto. At what point did that become their central focus, their goal together before the race?
Well, I would say, like, before I came on, the Vespa was such a part of it. I think like what we found when we were starting to work together was that we kind of dove into that fun kid idea that we could make this, and remember Alberto like draws it, and like after they make it, like they love it so much, like we'll go across the water and we'll ask for this drawing, exact same drawing, and that fires up Luca. And so the Vespa just became this this symbol for freedom for them, right? And we're also combining that with Luca's trouble at home. He's about to be shipped off to our version of a boarding school. He's never going to see this guy again. the possibility that they could actually go do this was so real to them, and we wanted to keep that real, right? Even to the point where they see like a crappy Vespa that they can afford, and they ultimately end up getting it, and in the end, to give a spoiler. But the Vespa was important because, like, I think we've all bonded with our best friends over something that we both just love and we both could want, and it could make the friendship so much better and so great if we could have it, right?
And the other side of it is that could it be a little preposterous because you're a kid and you don't know the world? Yeah. That was an interesting balance. We had to a little bit fight through it because, it isn't necessarily like, yes, I want you to do this. You kind of know this might be a bit of a hard thing to pull off, right? It's a little pipe dreamy, but I think, finding the balance between when you have a running away kind of structure, we found that you really had to adjust the dream and of course the symbol of it. Vespa did feel like, to be honest, if Piaggio didn't want to do this, we would have been in trouble because it was the perfect symbol for togetherness, friendship, and a certain amount of wind in the air, freedom. We don't even know what's past those hills, but we're going to go together there. And so you have that knob to use. And then the other one was really like, make sure there's enough of a bad situation you want to run away from, which of course takes us to Uncle Ugo, who is this wonderful way to represent what could happen to Luca, right? We really looked at, well, you're going to go with your uncle to the deep. And we, at first we made it like he would tell you about it and you would imagine it. And then we realized like, well, I don't think we need Luca to imagine this. I think we just represent it in the character with this bizarre idea that, maybe even the being there, makes you that way. That was kind of the fun with Uncle Ugo, which then was interestingly a wonderful collaboration with Sasha. I remember Jesse writing like very quick 2 or 3 different versions of these monologues, and then getting Sacha Baron Cohen in, and it was the perfect launching point for him to riff for like hours. And we had so much material that we ended up putting the button after the fact because we were like, we should use more of that Sacha Baron Cohen monologue.
Well, I want to talk for a second about one of the trickier parts of your process, and I actually usually talk about this in the non-spoiler section, but I'm mixing it up today in the spoiler section because it's okay for you to use specific examples if you want. One of the things that I think so many people are fascinated about the Pixar process is there is a competing chicken versus the egg situation between the script and the ever-evolving animatic and the storyboards and the concepts and the sets that are being built, because these things all take so long that things like sets are built and they could be used no matter how the stories change. The dialogue could be retracked a bunch of times, but the thing that people get really just wilded out by is that it's all going on simultaneously. And it seems chaotic from the outside.
Yeah.
So talk us through it a little, Mike and Jesse and Enrico, of course, all of you, of just your perspective of your part of it as you are writing a script where at the same time people are storyboarding a sequence, I'm just going to say for the bike race, that maybe has not yet been written, but they know is going to happen. It's just wild to think about.
Yeah, what a dance. I mean, if I can start in, well, there's a couple of things. One is that you try and do the least of that as possible, so that they're actually smack in the middle of one of the hardest moments when you start production on a few sequences. So that is like, it's asphalt starting to harden with your feet in it. And when you're rewriting half of the rest of the movie. That absolutely is happening. Though we do have quite a few years where we're focusing on story and we can bust it open more freely. And I'll say, I'm curious what you guys think, but when you think of script and story and animatics, then slowly that becomes the same thing because we're working so closely. So we put it on a script, we of course review it, we give it our best shot, I might ask for an alt, and maybe it's a tiny bit shorter because I'm a little worried that it's getting a little wordy or whatever. But then you record it, you put it up, you look at it, and invariably 50% of it won't work as well as you thought, and you're actually reworking it even before you're putting up as a full animatic. So Jesse would be already 2 weeks later after we've boarded it, we'd be in edit like, how do we fix this thing? Okay, we need a rewrite there of one sentence, right? And so I feel like that becomes one thing, and I think that's what's hard, right? Like I'm curious about your guys' experience, because it's definitely very hand in hand, quick. I mean, sometimes I remember Jesse would be on the phone, I'm recording someone, Jesse gets an idea, he texts me the idea, I tell the actor, like, what if you said it that way? You know, it's that kind of a collaboration that's honestly really truly also exciting, but it is a bit messy. And there are those moments where you're like, you might have an amazing idea, but the ship has sailed for some things because production is off, right? Like, I think you had a joke, Jesse, one day. He was like, what if there's a dam and the waterfall is gonna, you know, take over the town? You know, it's like, okay, that you know, I mean, it was a joke, but like, there's no way you can do that, right? Like at a certain point, because it's hugely expensive. But anyway, I leave to you guys the floor. But it's a wonderful question about how, you know, the things have to dance together.
Yeah, I gotta say, as a writer coming here, you know, before you come to Pixar, you're like, Pixar, my God, why are their movies always so good? What is it that they do? And then you come here and you realize, oh, I see what they're doing. I also see why no one else does it this way, because it is just sheer volume of time and effort and honestly creative destruction. And that most studios just don't have the stomach for it. I guess on top of that too, it takes a specific kind of person who can do that and not burn out and have the patience and presence of mind to stay in it. Because I completely agree, like story and writing and editing all kind of blend into each other, and we are all kind of doing the same job. And if that's probably going too far, but I think we do become this kind of organism where everyone sees what it is they ought to be doing, what part of the story or the process they need to be caretaking. And as a writer, yeah, like a lot of that is dialogue, but it's certainly not only that. I think Mike and I both felt we had to be at 30,000 feet, making sure each sequence tracks with each other's sequence. But of course, that's Enrico's job too, and that's the producer's job. And each of us, like when you work with other people for so long, we all know what each other's specialties are and each other's blind spots. And yeah, there's on a lot of movies, you don't get that kind of time to really become a team where you're all like so aware of each other. And the beauty of this movie, this project, and this way of working in general is that you do get to do that. It really,
well, I've always thought of it as and please don't take this the wrong way, it's a success and failure because you've been given the right to fail, in which you know that it's going to be a 4-year process. You know you're going to do 5 or 6 animatics, and it's the whole concept of progress versus perfection. Rather than just sticking to one idea that might not be working and trying to dust it up and make it look nice, there's a viciousness of the cycle in which you allow yourself to discard the things that aren't working and try something new and maybe revive the thing that you just cut the next animatic because you decide you like it and it still works and there's another way. And I've always seen that as a key to the success of the Pixar process. Mike, obviously coming off of Soul, working on this, what would you say is key to keeping all those moving parts going, but getting forward? I mean, obviously there was an early draft of the script in which there is what we would call a beginning, middle, and end. But all the parts in between, including the beginning, middle, and end, are up for grabs, which is a wild concept.
You know, I think it's having a release date, because giving
Deadline.
having like say like the studio comes and says like, we're releasing this movie summer of 2020, whether you like it or not. And 2021, what year are we in?
2021.
But if given our own devices, we'll continue to make this movie over and over and over again. We'll kill ourselves doing it. But it's only because the film has to stop that we stop. So so we're very aware of all of these approaching deadlines that lead up to the ultimate deadline of this is going in front of people, right? But I think if you ask any filmmaker here, the deadlines are such a focusing mechanism here. I mean, at least they are for me. And
Yeah.
different people thrive in different ways, but I like to kind of write and kind of get to the deadline. Some people like to wait till the deadline approaches and then write something, pulling it straight out of wherever I'm talking about Jesse.
Yeah, Mike, stop subtweeting. I'm right here, man.
But I mean, obviously, the first deadline is to have not just the concept, but a fleshed out version of the script or treatment. So different departments could start on story art, concept art, and then it just keeps evolving from there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, sometimes you don't even need a full script. So on
Right,
Soul,
that's what's so crazy.
you know, we didn't quite know what the third act was on Soul. We knew where we wanted it to go, and I think this is kind of somewhat similar to Luca in some ways as well. But we didn't. We knew what needed to happen in Soul, because at the end of the second act, Joe like figures it out. He has his epiphany, and he realizes he needs to go get 22. And how all that happened, that was it wasn't rushed, but it was punted for a long time. And it was also because we still had a lot of work to do in first and second act. Kind of the same, you know, similar with Luca. Like the bike race came much earlier than you know, the travel to the what do you call it, the zone in Soul. But it was all kind of like still some fine tuning that we ended up doing at the very end.
And would you say your deadline was 4 years for this? Like you knew that for Luca, you guys would have 4 years from when you started, Enrico?
We had a tiny bit longer because we, you know, as you were saying, like Soul and us were roughly, we couldn't tell it was going to be like, who's a bit ahead of them. And I think Soul just ended up being a little readier than us. That gave us a little extra time, which was helpful. I think I pitched this roughly 5 years from completion. So it took us a little bit longer, which gave us more one or two extra bites at the apple, which were great, because again, we struggled a little bit in the beginning with too much story, too much meat on the fire. Well, but to your last point, I think there's a willingness and to not be precious. That's a big part of even the kind of key collaboratives. If someone is a little bit attached to too much to one line or to something, like that usually doesn't fit here. It's not that we want to throw everything away. And in fact, I think one of the big jobs of a writer here is like, okay, you can try that, but be careful with X, Y, and Z, because this has been a through line, right? Like that, I think we count on the writers to be the keepers of the through line sometimes with the director. So I feel like though that we're quite the storyboarding, for example, is rough. We don't really polish our really rough things, and because we want to, you know, try it. If you polish something, it meant you would do one less iteration, for example, so you get a less you know, so it's really like, I've heard this often here at Pixar, is like, be quick to fail. And of course it's difficult because when you wrote your first draft, there's a sense of like, I think this is pretty good, right? But then you're like, no, it isn't. And then here's the good things that we're going to keep, and here's the things we're going to throw away. So it's it is this big willingness to be vulnerable, because again, if you go back into a brain trust situation, you have a lot of smart directors there, which are what make it amazing. They'll give you great notes, and then as a director, as in the writers, we take all those notes in and really have to be very make sure that they, you know, resonate with us, because of course there's going to be a lot of smart notes that you shouldn't take, even though they're smart, you know.
Of course. And, you know, in a movie like this where they have a secret, it's kind of a challenge to guess as an audience member of, are they going to be revealed? And then once you know that you are going to reveal the secret, there's so many different ways you could do it. The least of which I was expecting for one of the two people who is from the sea to say, he's a sea monster, and just out his friend. What were some of the iterations you played with for that? And how did you arrive at that final moment?
I'm very proud of how surprising that moment is. I love that. And, you know, we often, you know, dealing with screenwriting and structure, sometimes there's solidity in things we're comfortable with. And like sometimes uncomfortable and a little bit unusual kind of storytelling gets you to these points where you don't exactly know which way it's going to go, which I find is so key, right? Like that it's not expected. I can speak to that moment because the first time we did that, Alberto dragged Luca in it, so they both got splashed. So we realized, so that's a wonderful lesson because it felt it was Alberto's betrayal. And we realized, right, like if you think about it really from a structure point of view, we realized like our protagonist needs to be the worst. He needs to do the worst thing. He needs to screw up. So then now we and it was tricky. Like we definitely got a lot of notes. I don't know. That's pretty horrible of him to do, right? We kept on calling that moment like, I'm going to shove you under the bus, Alberto moment, you know. But I think we were all kind of excited, but that kind of like, ooh, that's viscerally kind of wrong. And I felt it juiced up things that were already in place, like Luca trying to get Alberto back at the tower was already written, but now all of a sudden he's got a lot to make up. He's got a real apology to give him, and it got us even to the idea of what if Alberto doesn't accept the apology. So actually, words are not going to be enough here. So in many ways, I'm glad you pinpoint that scene because it's so surprising. I remember feeling a couple of gasps in the screenings, and then you're like, okay, we're on to the right way there. And speaking of the screenings, just a little bit of a side note is that one thing that made this really hard is normally we watch all these things together in our screening room, which we couldn't do with this. And I remember us being a little bit nervous. I certainly being nervous, especially because that is a huge input. And that is one of the Pixar things that's so helpful because we are having every 3 months a very rough audience preview. And all of a sudden, it kind of was happening, but it was happening everybody on their laptop. And then the next day telling you, oh, I laughed at that by himself in the room. So like, for example, for comedy, we started going like, I remember that being funny. It's still funny, right? Like there was a lot of like difficulty with not having as much of an audience reaction to some of these moments, which we definitely take a lot of cues from that because normally, and we're back to, luckily we're back in the office and, you know, our movies can now we can screen, you know, safely in the screening room again.
Which is great. And, you know, I know we're running out of time. I just want to ask one last question. What was your toughest scene for each of you and how did you get through it? Mike, I guess starting with you, what was the toughest scene for you as a writer, the one you kept coming back to again and again?
Well, I did the first passes on that betrayal moment. So it was that was hard, and it was hard to get right because you don't want to turn the audience against these kids too much, right? And you certainly want to build some empathy around it, and you want to understand why. And so it was really like a great collaboration with Jesse and Enrico about maybe reverse the betrayal. Maybe it's Alberto like says, I'm going to betray you by revealing myself and proving to Julia who I am. But just before that, Luca says like sea monster and kind of puts all of it on him, causing Urkel to come over and throw spears. It's the worst, right? Which is also something that gets out of that I think Enrico did a great job with, that it becomes something bigger that Luca didn't realize. Like he didn't realize Urkel was there. He didn't realize he almost just killed his friend. He only wanted to maintain what he wanted, which was this friendship with Julia and the idea of going to school. And it gets out of his hands. But Jesse, what was yours?
And Mike, I know that you need to go, so I want to let you go, and because you're being summoned to a galaxy far away.
Yes.
But before you go, do you want to tell us anything about what you're working on next? And then we'll hear from Jesse and Enrico as to their toughest scenes. Is there anything you want to talk about that's going on next for you?
I can't talk about it much, but it's going to be great. I can say that.
Well, there you go.
Really good.
We're doing, the studio is doing a lot of stuff right now. We are feeding theaters, we're feeding Disney Plus, so it's it's as busy as it's ever been. So it's a real exciting time.
I'm excited to see what you do next, and thank you so much for being so generous with
Oh,
your
it's great to
time.
be here.
And now
Yeah.
now we're gonna hear from Jesse and Enrico.
I'll see you guys. Yeah.
See you.
Hey, Mike.
Amen. I guess I'll go next. My toughest scene was probably, and this was all crowdsourced too, of course, but when the kids win the race, and then get revealed essentially, or it's sort of at the finish line, what happens? We know these kids are going to be, they've already been revealed to the whole town, and how does the town react? And this was a tricky thing because the thing that you would like to happen is for the whole town to embrace them and say, it doesn't matter that you see monsters. We realize like that doesn't make a difference. We love you. And it's just sort of happily ever after. And we put up a version or two like that, and it always felt really naive. It felt like in this world that we're living in today, where there is so much intolerance, even in the face of, knowing that we're all basically the same, and all this proof that we have of our commonality, that intolerance persists, it feels more correct for some people never to accept people who aren't like them. And we struggled with how to depict it, and the breakthrough came when we realized that this could be some insight that grandma who's kind of been lurking at the fringes, sort of a comic figure, and yet, has some access to this human world. If she can say something like, it's never going to be totally easy for this kid to go into this world of people who aren't like him, but he will find the people who accept him, the ones who see him. And in fact, he already has proven that he has, and that's what friendship is, or at least that's a part of it. That made a lot of things fall into place. And so that was a big breakthrough. Yeah, it was a tough scene though. Also, before I go, I really need to show this visual representation of how long it took to make this movie, which is, one of my weird hobbies is origami. And so this is a donut made out of pieces of the script. And it took an extremely long time to make.
Every piece, a page of the script, right?
Yeah. It was a page of the script where it was like, oh, we're not using that anymore. Great, I can put it into the donut.
Into beautiful art.
That is amazing. I love that. I love that. Jesse, is there anything you want to tell us about that's next for you?
Oh my gosh. I don't think there's anything I can announce. I may or may not be back here working on something else, which is super exciting. But I really love this place. This is a fantastic place to make art.
Well, I love this script that you've done. So thanks so much for your time and talking about it as well.
Thanks so much. Can I jump too? I'm sorry.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Enrico.
Right.
Jesse.
Saving the best for last, Enrico.
All right. Yeah, I
toughest
do.
scene.
Yeah, I do. I must say that the line that Jesse singled out, I loved how that brought together our themes, because in many ways it brought this theme of feeling different together with friendship, right? Because it really and curiosity, which was really what Luca's journey was about. And so I just love how he encapsulated that in that one line. That it was just wonderful. It really spoke to a lot that we were really feeling. We were in the middle of social unrest and so much going on. So I'm glad we were able to find that the subtlety. We certainly did not want a fable-like wonderful happy ending, that felt false. But as far as a scene that this happens often to us, but it's actually meeting Luca, and the reason why that's an interestingly difficult scene is it was really portraying someone who's very self-limiting, but that is pulled by something. So it's very hard to keep that, and also an introvert, right? Like we took a lot of swings at that to show a spark. We want to lean into this character, but what's wrong with him? It was a kind of character that needed to be pulled out of the water literally by Alberto a few scenes later. So we really fought hard to not make him too active, because otherwise that he didn't have an issue, right? But this, he had ingrained in his head what he was taught by his mother, the sense of danger and security, the Bruno of it, right? So that scene of him, the key ended up, and it's also very visual. So it's not only dialogue, it's very, how can he be interesting as he does his job? So finding his job, and the key ended up being keeping him a bit active. So stressed out, anxious. And then the second key was imagining what is in his head. So like, because there's the conundrum, like, well, if it's self-limiting, you shouldn't go up to the surface. So we took a lot of stabs that didn't feel like, well, he's not that pent in then. And so then the key ended up using imagination to see his wish, which then became this nice, wonderful thread of imagination that's very Fellini-esque, and that I knew I wanted to put in the movie. Certainly, a few scenes later. So that became the nice first introduction of, well, I can't do it because I was never there, but my head can't help but imagine it. So that first scene, interestingly, and the whole idea of goldfish was kind of bizarre. That was something we boarded many times.
Well, and just because I think we have another minute left, not only are you one of the writers, you're the director as well. What was your toughest scene as the director? And I loved what you did in this, your directorial debut, but what was something that you felt really challenged by creatively as a director, as your toughest scene as a director? And how did you creatively get through it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, to be honest, it's still cracking the hardest part is still cracking that emotion and cracking the writing and the storyboarding of it. Because once we were in production, we had this wonderful experience of plussing these scenes, having very collaborative experiences with animation. Animation came up with wonderful ideas to elevate our every shot. You're always looking here for amazing talent that we have here to even kick it up a notch. So we have a lot of wonderful stories of like animators, like the fish that's surrounding, swimming above Luca's head when he gets knocked down. There was an animator's pitch. And I was like, that's an awesome idea. Let's do it, right? Like, so I love that everywhere here, you have story artists, you have writers, everybody's pitching in, and that everything gets plus. I still think the hardest part was truly concocting structurally a movie that wanted to have a little bit of a different, more intimate feel, and that fight of like, can we do this without a big engine, right? Like sometimes our stories have strong drives, and that was still the hardest thing. And to a certain degree, even what I'm most proud of, it's what makes the movie personal and hopefully unique and a little different. It's like making something a little different. It's hard. So it was really cracking a bit that tone and bit by bit saying like, this is enough. We don't have to go over a board with more stakes or a bigger ending, and I think we got good support within the studio. There was a sense once we found the ending, finding the ending was the key thing. We started really getting emotional, and then it gave me this, that's where we're all heading as a director once you have those things. So really before that, that's where we were still struggling, and that's still the memory that is the hardest, where it was like there was still too much meat on the fire. We were on the process of simplifying. Those were the hardest days. Yeah.
Right, and you have your three characters kind of going in different directions at the ending.
Yeah,
one of them
sure.
staying behind. I mean, it was kind of interesting that they don't go off together. Was that always the way that it was going to end, or were there other iterations of that?
It wasn't in the beginning, and then honestly, I think it came around screening 3, and it was big, and it actually helped. This is almost too perfect, but like I had a good conversation, I remember, with my best friend Alberto. My best friend is really named Alberto. We kept his name.
That's great.
And I remember him. It kind of was inspired by him, because we had this conversation. I told him, like, listen, I'm talking about our friendship. And that was so strange, right? That we were so close. We were big nerds. We were, we were losers. But he pointed out this idea of like, I kind of feel like it was healthy for us to go our separate ways, because there is also something about these friendships that can be a little insular and limiting. And that started this idea of like, oh, maybe, there's it's good for us. I'm gonna bring you with me. So this art felt like, oh, you changed me. So you're within my identity now, but we have to go our separate way to grow up. So that was the key thing, and it really started with this conversation with him that he owned in on the fact that it probably was healthy, and there was something a little bit unhealthy about us being so close and maybe a little bit not open to the world as much, so yeah, that it's amazing. And I had conversations before, but it just came up with him at a certain point, usually helpful. Who would have imagined? I was just kind of filling in a little bit on what I was doing, that he might have to sign non-disclosure agreement sooner or later.
Life rights. He signed away life
for
rights.
the use of his name. Yeah, but no,
Yeah.
I think that's a wonderful little thing, and it was really great to see him in Italy in June when we showed the movie. We had another adventure together, kind of on the premiere of the day.
That's awesome. What could you tell us that you're doing next? What do you want to talk about that's going on next for you?
Yeah, I'm back in development, and I took a nice little break in the summer. It's definitely, it was a bit of a crazy couple of years, especially doing it from home. The hours kind of got longer and longer. Trying to do it with a little less productivity, but I am now, back to the drawing board. I had a couple ideas. You kind of go back to the pitches from the past, and there's a couple I still really like, so I'm reworking those.
Okay, that's great. Well, look, you've been very generous with your time. I love Luca, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Enrico, thanks a lot for talking with us today.
Thanks, Jeff. It was a pleasure to chat.
Take it easy.
Bye.
All right, I'm going to press stop.